expert classes.
What's up guys, my name is Patrick Foley. I'm a 3D artist and I'm here with Desire Company. So in this class I'm going to be going over how to make a nighttime environment scene using Cinema 4D. All you'll need is a computer, preferably a PC because of the Octane render engine we'll be using, a computer chair, a mouse, keyboard, Cinema 4D, Octane, and the third-party plugin Forester. All right, so we're gonna dive right in on this, and I think the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna prep the scene and add a ground plane, which will serve as our foundation where we're gonna lay the trees. And so first here, we're gonna go in here and kind of drag this to the side and grab in a plane. Simple as that. And then to see the segments we're working with here, we're gonna use the display and probably go hidden line, just so we can see now the segments we're working with. You can see the segments as kind of the resolution here of the ground. And we're gonna go with width, I'd say let's go like 100 by 100, and that gives us a nice dense resolution of a plane here to work with. And then we're gonna do something and apply a displacer effector on this plane. So we're gonna drag this down on top of the plane so it is a child of the plane, so to speak. And we're just gonna take the shading tab here and grab a shader and use a noise. And so with this, we're gonna be using a procedural noise, which is gonna be really helpful for creating this divot in the ground that we'll later put in a body of water. And so to create this divot, you see we're deforming the ground here, and we can change the height of this noise. And what we wanna do is we wanna just subtract from the bottom center, not all around as we're doing. We're gonna take the shader type and go to gradient. And as you can see from this view, we're actually gradiating a slope. And so we're gonna change the gradient type from 2D U to circular. And now we can see we're getting kind of a divot in the ground. And if we drag the slider a little bit shallower there, we're getting a more defined divot in the ground, as you can see. And the next thing we'll want to do is just kind of displace this a little bit. So if we turn up the turbulence, we'll be getting kind of a more naturally divoting kind of deformation in the ground. And that's looking good. And we can kind of take this from here and manipulate it right there. Again, this is procedural, so we don't really have to worry about kind of losing the ability to go back. That's looking good. The next thing we'll want to do is add the water. Pretty much for water, all you have to do is add another plane. So as you can see, we have the water here, and as we move this up and down, we're essentially changing the level or the height of the water. That's looking pretty good. And I think what we can do, again, just to make this a little bit more realistic, is adding a layer system to this ground, just so it's not 100% uniform. So what we want to do is, and we can title these two, let's go ground, and we can title this water. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do here is add an additional layer of displacement to this ground, because we're trying to get away from this kind of uniformity that we're seeing here. And the way we can do that is honestly just create another displacer and go drop it on top of this displacer. And we can name those two. We can call this overall to kind of symbolize the fact that we're gonna be adjusting every single part of it. And then we can call this one whole. So pretty self-explanatory. The next thing we can do is just change the overall noise. So we can just add another noise again. And as you can see, we're affecting everything. But this one doesn't have to be that crazy. So we can take the height down to like 5 centimeters. Or maybe actually something like 3. And we're gonna change the noise type to reflect what we kind of want the ground to look like. And we have some presets here we can choose from. And so we're gonna go over here. Let's try this one out called electric. Looking nice, but it's kind of repeating, so we can take the global scale up, which is nice. And now we're kind of getting this kind of more organic looking ground. And I think we take the water and go down a little bit, and maybe take the hole and increase the height. Now we kind of have a bigger pool to play with here. So we take the water up, that's looking good. And the next thing we want to do is set the camera. So we'll want to set a good foundation for the composition. So to do that, we'll just create a camera. So if you do Shift-C, that brings up your control center. And so what we're doing now is we're going to add a camera to kind of change the composition and kind of lock in our camera parameters. just so we have the composition that we're working with. And so with Shift-C selected, we're gonna just type in camera. And we can choose an octane camera because we're gonna be rendering in octane, and that's good. So by clicking this square, you're just hopping inside the camera, and we're gonna zero out all the coordinates except Z. As we can see, we're working with a 36mm camera, and if we just scroll all the way back in our Z, and a little bit up in our Y, that's how we're kind of navigating this camera here. And then taking one of the rotations and tilting up a little bit will help as well. And so this looks pretty nice. So we got a nice little composition here. I guess before we get too far, we want to open up the settings just so we can see over here, or over here actually, the aspect ratio. So we're working with 1200 by 1200, which is nice for certain scenes like posting on Instagram, give you that square format. So I'm totally fine with that. I think we're looking pretty good. So if you go back to display hidden line, we can see kind of everything that's going on here. I think now we can start to work with some of the trees. So we're gonna open up Forester by 3D Quaker and see what kind of presets we can choose as far as setting our trees down. So in here, we're gonna go to our extensions, which will be our Forester plugin. And then we're gonna click Forester Tree. And obviously our scene is not quite to scale, but that's totally okay. So we can totally take the Forester tree and go in our tree parameters and just real quickly take the tree size down so that it fits kind of the look of our scene more. And I think something like this might work. So about a 0.2 for the size of the tree. And that looks good. And it's really as easy as going to this tree library and picking a bunch of these presets that we have to choose from. So you have all these different types of trees that work well in different types of scenes. And so for a scene like this, I'm not too sure about what I'm gonna use, but I'm thinking about using something like the, let's see here. That's the thing, it's all about kind of testing these out. So I think maybe working with something like maybe something crazy like the Delonix or something. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but that looks good. And now we got the tree here, and we can see kind of how this is totally mapped in the center, which is not what we want. So what we want to do is kind of clone that throughout the whole landscape. And so for that, we're going to use something called Octane Scatter. So within Octane, you're going to go click Octane Scatter, and you're going to make that tree a child of the Octane Scatter. What that's going to do is essentially tell the program that you want to map it to some sort of geometry. And so within Octane Scatter, within distribution, we don't want to make that vertex because then that would be distributing them across every single point of the geometry, which would be way too many. So we're going to go to surface, which gives you a value of 1,000 to start off with. And so if we take the ground and just drag it onto the surface, you can see it's cloning a ton of trees kind of cloned on the surface. And if you click render, what happens is we are being bombarded with tons of trees that are very uniform and that we don't necessarily want to see yet. So this is fine for now, but we're definitely going to slim down these trees. So when you go to Octane Scatter, you're just going to want to go to count and go to like 400. Still too many for now. Let's try 100. Now, still a lot, but you can definitely see what's going on here. And it's a bit easier to manage. So a couple things we'll want to do, or at least the first thing, is we'll want to make it so the trees are not cloned where the water is. And to do that, what we'll do is take the noise shader we're using for the divot in the ground, and then we're going to copy that. And then we're going to go to Octane Scatter and go to the shader right here, which is pretty much where you're going to be mapping the trees. And let's see if we can just paste that in there. That looks fine. And then when you raise this level, you can see that these trees start to disappear in that hole. And that's exactly what we want. And now we can see that everything is pretty much where they're supposed to be, which looks fine. So right now, that just looks like a really weird, barren landscape of trees. And so just to play a little bit more with what we're gonna do, we're gonna take the trees, and when in the main tree parameters, you're gonna go to viewport levels and bump that up to give it some more detail. Now they all have leaves. And so this gives you an idea of compositionally where everything is gonna look, and if you have too much going on, if you don't. So clearly we have way too much going on as we speak. I think we're looking like we need to remove some trees. So one cool thing you can do is you can totally just randomize the seed by just clicking a bunch of different times in this parameter section. Every time you click that, you're randomizing where these trees are being loaded out. So you can see, every time we click this, they're being randomly distributed through the geometry. And so far, I'm not liking any of these, so we might have to take away some of the trees for now. So maybe let's go to 50 and keep randomizing the seed. I think I liked one of these over here actually. It showed a little bit of the water, or to be water. Something like this for now looks okay. And so the next thing we want to do is take the tree and boost the viewport level up one more time, because that's going to give it even more leaves and foliage. And there we have almost our finished trees. I think we can start messing with some lighting. So what we want to do is, to light this, we're going to go to our Octane Sun, or Daylight. As you can see, when you add that, you can add some really cool colors by just rotating these things around and just getting some different kind of looks here. But like I said before, we're going to be doing nighttime, so we can get rid of that, create a HDR environment, and that creates like a fully black scene. So we've added this Octane Sky, which essentially makes everything pretty realistic in the sense that there's no light being beamed on this scene. And that's kind of what we want because we want to be at nighttime. And so the first thing that we'll do is add our own light called the Octane Area Light. And if you don't see these, I have a custom workspace right here. So you can just go Shift-C and just type in Area, and you can just click Octane Area Light. And so it creates this pretty big light here. And I'm going to switch the views by clicking the middle mouse button here, rotating this thing 90 degrees and bringing it all the way up. And so you can see it's like adding this massive softbox to the scene. And the first thing we'll want to do is take this light and turn off the camera visibility so we can't see the actual object it's emitting from. And we can kind of lower that there. And I think that looks somewhat decent. Again, we can't see a whole lot of what's going on. So I think I'm actually going to take this camera and reposition it a little bit, make it lower, zoom in a little bit, and maybe go a little bit higher. I'm gonna mess around with the distribution a little bit more, so I'm gonna change the seed. A lot of different options here. And this one, you're just kind of picking a seed that kind of fits what you're going for. And sometimes it can definitely take a while depending on the scene and where the camera's placed. Another thing to take into account is the leaves and how they're kind of projecting the light. Something to note is subsurface scattering is very important when you're talking about this. So before I get too far, I'm going to change this rendering mode from direct lighting to path tracing. And you're going to see that right off the bat, all this light bounces off much more than from direct lighting, because in direct lighting, when the light hits the ground, it stops, versus in real life, when light hits the ground, it bounces everywhere. And that's where we get like the illumination called global illumination. And so this looks a little bit better. But we're actually going to transfer these materials to something that we can manipulate. So we're going to convert the materials to Octane materials. And then we're going to materials, remove unused. And then when we go into our leaf material, when we drag our main node from diffuse and also add another node extension to transmission, we can see that more light can pass through these leaves. And that's kind of what we're going for. And this is looking good. I'm gonna still play around with the seeds because I'm not totally happy yet, but it's good to know that we have a lot of that stuff out of the way. We're getting some more variation in lighting with this one, which looks fine. Again, I'm just going until I'm happy with the distribution that I like. This one's really cool. The next thing I want to do is kind of give that water some texture. So in here, I'm gonna create a purely metallic material in Octane. And what we're gonna do is just drag this on top of the water. And we can see that essentially created like a pond in the middle of this whole thing. So if I want to increase that hole, all I have to do is drag this out. And because it's completely procedural, I can drag this out, make the hole bigger, and it actually manipulates the trees because they're being mapped onto this ground. So if the ground changes, the trees change as well. So that's very cool. And we can see the trees start to bend as I start to do this. And to avoid that, we're gonna go back to the octane scatter and just take this normal line all the way down until they start bending in the right direction for the most part again. And that looks pretty good. So this is kind of like a cool little, almost like an abstract environment scene so far. The one thing we'll wanna do is go to the camera tag here and go to camera imager, enable camera imager, and drag the highlight compression all the way up. And that just gives us more latitude to work with. So the next thing we'll want to do is randomize the trees on their rotation and their scale as well, because right now all the trees are technically the exact same, and we'll want to kind of deviate from that. So we're going to create a random effector, so Shift-C, random, and that'll just create a random effector right here. And if you drag that above the octane scatter, within the octane scatter, you go to effectors and just drag the random on top. And you can see they've kind of randomized the position so far, which is cool. And they're gonna go to random, parameter, rotation, and just make this number skyrocket. What they're doing now is they're all rotating on their own axis differently. So this is creating just a much bigger kind of variation there. What I'm gonna do though is take the random parameter and take the position off, because we don't want to randomize this position on the y-axis or anything like that, because then they'll be floating. So this looks cool right now. They're all kind of randomized. It's kind of like a cool, kind of scenic little scene here. And I think I'm pretty happy with that so far. I think the last thing we want to do, or one of the last things, is texture the ground a little bit, because right now it's like pure white. So what we'll do is just create a diffuse material, drag that on top of the ground, and we will start texturing this ground. So we have a node system here. This represents our ground material. And if we were to just drag a diffuse texture to an RGB spectrum, now we can just change the color of the ground. Make it black, make it white. We can make it red for all we care. And then really any kind of color you're going for. So if I kind of want to go with something kind of more like a realistic ground, we'd probably be looking in the brown region. So we're texturing the ground here, and I think what I want to do is create some variation, because we don't want this thing to be completely just brown. We want it to kind of look like there's differentiating factors going on. So instead of adding this node, I'm gonna delete that. I'm gonna drag in and make a mix texture. And so what this does is you can create a mix of two separate colors. And what we'll do is create a RGB spectrum, and then just duplicate that and drag that to texture 2. And pretty much what's going on here is when we make one of these brown and the other one, let's say white, the mixed texture adds as a kind of gradient. So right now we're at 0.5, which is a complete mix of brown and white. If we go to 0, it's complete brown. If we go to 1, it's complete white. But instead of having the amount be this arbitrary value, we can drag another node as a noise. Now this noise is being used to kind of drive this texture. And we can kind of go play around with this, and to see what we're doing here, if we right-click solo this, we can see the noise being projected here, which is, there's not too much variation, so we're gonna boost the contrast a little bit. Now we can see kind of changes happening, and this is pretty much, it's like masking. So the black values will be texture 2, the white values will be texture 1. And so when we kind of change the noise here, we can see what different variations we have. I kind of like this Ober one. And if we kind of take the global scale down, it gives us a much more kind of randomized looking noise. And so if we right click disable, we can see that we have a bunch of different, it almost looks like snow on the ground or something. But I don't think we're gonna use white. We're gonna kind of bring that down and make it something a little bit more realistic, maybe like a lighter brown, but we still have some variations here, and that's cool with me. Then we can just take this noise and drag it to the bump. So now we'll be getting bumps in our ground as well, and you can see with the texture here, we're getting some nice bump. The next thing we're gonna do is add some fog volumetrics to the scene and kind of see what happens here, because right now it's pretty stark. A lot of areas are pure black, a lot of areas have light, so we're gonna add some volumetrics and see how that works out. So with the Octane Sky, I'm gonna go to medium and add fog. And you can see already that there's being fog enabled. And if I take the trees out, you can see what's happening here is this light is kind of giving this foggy look, and the brighter the light, the more it'll kind of shine through. So what we'll do is go to the scattering medium, drag that up a little bit, and drag the phase all the way to something like 0.82, I guess. And then the density, go up. And now when we add our Octane scatter back, we can see that we're getting a decent amount of fog, which kind of just creates some nice realistic haze. And you can tell when you move the light up and down, you're kind of getting these things gleaming through the scene. You can move the light wherever you want. The lighting will change based on what's going on. And that's kind of the thing with this scene. It's almost mysterious looking because you have this like arbitrary light kind of just glimmering from some unknown origin, which I think is kind of cool. You can always play with it, increase the light, decrease the light, and then maybe increase the power. And you can see that I think the smaller the light source and the brighter it is, the heavier the God rays will be. That's always kind of a good thing when you're working with these kind of scenes. So we have the subsurface scattering, the leaves kind of soaking in all that sunlight. That's looking pretty good. So we're looking good here. I think we're just gonna render this out and kind of see what finalized image we can get before we mess with it in Photoshop. From here, we're just gonna go to the max samples and drag this to something like 1200. The resolution is fine by me, and I think we should be good to go. We gotta make sure we're hopped inside the camera, and then we can just click render. So there you have it. This is our finalized image here. So whatever you decide to do with the image from here on out, as long as you have fun, I can't wait to see what you guys create with it.